All right. Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started now. Welcome to our latest presentation in our Solutions for Success series. Today's topic is transitioning from on-premise servers to Azure, something we are working with and discussing with a number of our clients. So why don't we jump right in? The agenda for today's session, a little bit about Point Alliance, transition from on-premises servers to Azure. Again, this is a 25-minute session, so we will keep it relatively high level. Give you some best practices, talk about next steps. And then if you do have questions, please feel free to post those in the chat, or we are happy to follow up with you after the session as well. So who is Point Alliance? Quickly, we are a Toronto-based Microsoft partner focused on modern workplace solutions, everything Microsoft Cloud. We have 11 competencies with Microsoft, and our team is fully certified. So anything in the Microsoft Cloud are areas of specialization for us, and we don't need to dig into every one of those. My name is Jonathan Hamilton. I'm the president at Point Alliance. And so I will be giving the session today. So let's jump in. So this is a common question or common statement from many of our clients. I'm a Microsoft Cloud customer. I've migrated my email. I've migrated my files, my data, my content, probably to SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive. A variety of places. I may well have retired my file servers, which is great. But now what do I do with the remaining applications and servers that exist in my infrastructure, whether that's in a data center that I host on premise in one of my office locations, whether that is a private data center where I've got servers and racks, what have you. Again, what do I do with these as part of my digital transformation project or cloud migration, and how do I get started? So where do I start? And a lot of these bullets may seem common to a lot of your technology projects and programs, but we'll step through these again. Discover. So what are we running? What do we have? What do we need? So the initial discovery. Again, an inventory of servers and applications. Those may be physical servers. For most of you, those will be virtual servers. You might be running VMware, but what do we have in our environment that continues to run either on-premise or in a private data center? Assess would be that you don't necessarily want to pick up everything that you've got and move it as is to the cloud. That may be your decision ultimately. But in a similar fashion to how you may have assessed the files that you were going to migrate into SharePoint, Teams, and OneDrive, maybe, again, we don't need some legacy applications moved into the cloud. Maybe there are some things that we've done from a historical basis that don't need to be part of our migration plan. Step 3 would be the actual migration and deployment of some of these servers and applications. Again, we'll talk about sort of what happens between assess and migrate and deploy in a minute. But we get into the movement of these workloads. Step 4, which is very important and sometimes new to people, is managing the cost and billing. So again, we're going to show you the calculators that Microsoft provides that are going to give you some guidance going into projects like this. But again, until you get into the Azure world and you're able to evaluate sort of the size and speed of the servers and the resources that you've procured, you're not necessarily going to know exactly what those costs are going to be. And so we want to minimize the number of surprises going in. And then we want to keep a close eye on what we're paying for once we're moved into the Azure cloud. to see if there are things that we can turn down or costs that we can be saving. Again, we're going to release workloads, be those in the cloud or on-prem post-deployment. We are going to take the opportunity potentially to modernize some of these applications. So again, when I mentioned, are we just picking up virtual servers and moving them from on-premise into the cloud? Or are we looking, whether it's at the same time or post-migration, of modernizing some of these applications? So how are they built? How do they integrate with each other? And again, there's different ways to do things in the cloud that may be more efficient, that may be simpler. And then finally, support. So once we've moved into this environment, who on our team, and our team being, the internal client team, is going to support the Azure environment and the cloud infrastructure? And do we need, or have we aligned ourselves with a partner if and when we potentially need additional help? So these are all things to think about as we get started in the process. So I had mentioned earlier the Azure pricing calculator. We've got a link on one of the slides at the end. So don't worry, when you get a copy of the presentation, you'll have that link if you're unfamiliar with the calculator. Again, it's a great place to start to get an understanding of what you're looking at. Again, if you have a simple infrastructure with a handful of servers, and some of those are web servers and app servers and database servers, again, you can get a pretty good idea of, from a workload perspective, what it's going to look like from a monthly or annual cost perspective. And the calculator is broken down into all the different areas. Again, as you can see on the screen, though it's kind of small, we can pick virtual machines, we can pick databases, we can pick a variety of components that are going to work up our calculation. What's important to note, and we won't go into a demo of the calculator because you can play around with that on your own, is that Azure can be complicated. And this screen, though the components and the bullets are very small, are all the different bits and pieces within Azure that you may be selecting as part of your calculation of expected costs, or that may be part of your overall solution. So again, just at a quick glance, we probably have over 100 different components here as we look at the different sections of AI, management tools, security, integration, compute, identity, storage, containers, databases, web. We've got lots of different components, lots of different areas. Again, depending on what we're looking to move and then post move, because maybe we're going to keep it pretty simple to start and we're going to move VMs into this world. Maybe then we're going to start leveraging Azure SQL as opposed to a VM for a database server, or we're going to build logic apps as opposed to the custom .NET or ASP apps that we may have built in the past. So different ways of doing things. Again, the calculator is very useful. Be mindful, though, that there are lots of bits and pieces. And so easy to get started. And then as we want to know more or leverage different components of Azure, again, a little more research, perhaps consultation with your team or outside partners to help navigate the Azure world. So very high level approach. We talked about sort of the bullets of discovery and assess and deploy and migrate. So we can look at, migrating your first workload into Azure. Microsoft provides a lot of great resources. I should tell you off the bat. So when I mentioned, talking to Microsoft partners, certainly you can do a lot of this research on your own. The benefit of potentially talking to a partner is that they may have gone through this many times before with other clients and will have a better understanding or appreciation for some of the best practices or pitfalls that you might run into. But by all means, Microsoft provides an abundance of reading and resources for you to do your own research and planning as well. Number two, migration scenarios. Again, Microsoft provides tools themselves, as well as there's other third-party tools depending on what we're looking to migrate. Are we just looking to pick up and move VMs? Are we looking to migrate different workloads, different databases? As I mentioned, what are the best practices around what we're looking to migrate? And a lot of this will depend on the complexity of our project. So, again, as I'd mentioned earlier, are we just picking up and moving a handful of servers, or do we have a few dozen servers integrated in a complex environment with a lot of different components that we need to be mindful of? Number 4, process improvements. So again, the migration activity itself is one of the activities or the core activity in a migration project. At the same time, we do have the opportunity as part of that project or post-project to make process improvements to our applications, to our processes around technology. So let's talk about readying your landing zone for migration. So what do we need to be mindful of as we first set up our Azure environment? And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, again, many of you will have moved your mail and your files and your data, and you'll have a certain comfort level and familiarity with Microsoft 365 and some of the admin components, but maybe you haven't delved into Microsoft Azure and some of the administration there and some of the resource groups, and again, how we get started. So the first step really is setting up your landing zone for migration. You will most likely have a migration that is a phased approach and not necessarily a lift and shift in a weekend of your whole infrastructure. So we want to establish hybrid connectivity first and foremost between your network and the Azure environment that you'll be setting up. We want to look at identity management and security. So how will we be using Azure Active Directory? Are we just concerned about authorization and authentication within our organization, or do we have web applications that outside members or brokers or clients are logging into? And so does that get a little more complicated with perhaps Azure B2C or Azure B2B? Maybe you're an organization that even has another third-party identity management solution like Okta or something like that. So again, how do identities and authentication and authorization fit into, again, this hybrid environment while we live in that until we're migrated? Enabling hybrid DNS. So certainly all the DNS routing that will be applicable for users and computers to find the necessary applications and routes that they need to. Configuring a hub firewall. So what firewalls are going to continue to exist in our environment during the migration and post-migration? So most likely you're still going to have firewalls in your office locations. What level of firewalls do we need in our Microsoft Azure environment as well from a security perspective? Number 5, routing, and again, we'll go into these in a little more detail. But just what is the routing? How is that going to work? Again, both in Azure and while we live in this hybrid environment. Configuring monitoring and management. Again, this captures 2 components. One, the security component of what we're doing in the cloud and how we're securing this environment. And then secondly, from a cost and billing perspective, again, are we monitoring resources? Do we have alerts set up so that when we are nearing dollar thresholds, we get notifications so that, we've seen this happen with clients, we've seen this happen with ourselves, turning on different Microsoft services in Azure, having a idea of what the costs are going to be. But then, a couple days into the month, seeing that the costs that you thought you were going to accumulate over 30 days have been exceeded in 3 days. And we don't want to, wait till the end of the month and get hit with a bill of thousands of dollars when we expected something in the hundreds. So again, setting all the monitoring up and the security to have a better appreciation of what's going on in our environment. And then preparation for Defender for Cloud. And again, we can do a lot with Defender for Cloud as it pertains to security. And so we'll touch on that a little bit as well. So digging into these in a little more depth, again, establishing our hybrid connectivity. So during our Azure landing zone deployment, what are the subscriptions that we need? How will we be setting up our virtual network and our network gateways? VPN connectivity, again, into Azure and between our locations. And just how does this all get set up? So again, to the end user, it is seamless, right? Because that is really what we want to accomplish at the end of the day, is that a business user who is sitting down at their laptop, be it in the office or at home, and connecting to these applications wherever they may be, whether we've moved them to the cloud or not, has a simple and seamless experience, and that they're logging in as they typically have, that we have single sign-on set up, whatever multi-factor authentication settings we may have for additional security. But at the end of the day, all the security, all the routing is taken care of in the background, and we're happy with how that is set up. Preparing the identity. Again, we talked about this a little bit a few minutes ago. So identity subscriptions or resource groups and a virtual network for subnets. Again, what are we using for identities? How are these being managed? Understanding Azure Active Directory and what's now been branded by Microsoft as Entra. And again, are we just worried about internal users, or are there other stakeholders and target audiences that we need to be mindful of that need to log in and authenticate against some of these applications or systems that we're running? Enabling hybrid DNS. So again, we talked about how we're going to resolve DNS requests. And making sure that this is set up so that it's seamless for users and that everything is routing appropriately, be it in the cloud, subdomains that we may be using, servers that we'll continue to use on premise. And so just making sure that that is all set up accordingly. Configuring the hub firewall. So again, depending on which firewall choices you're making in Azure, and what I would suggest as well is some of this can certainly affect your monthly costs as well. So having a look at the firewall requirements, the security and the functionality that's required. There are different options within Azure. Some of these, are hundreds of dollars a month. Others are thousands of dollars a month. So being mindful of, what are the firewall requirements and what best meets your needs in Azure. Routing. So we touched on this or sort of lumped it in as well with the DNS updates and the hybrid DNS. But again, what are the scenarios and how does Azure accommodate those, be it routing between resources in the same virtual network, peered virtual networks, and how that routing is going through virtual network gateways as well is all supported within Azure. Configuring monitoring and management as part of the deployment for the landing zone. Again, we've talked about that you'll need to provision policies that enroll your resources in log analytics to make sure that you're getting the reporting and the audit trail that you want. Again, we talked about alerts in the landing zone to notify administrators of cost thresholds that you're reaching or exceeding. So again, just making sure that we're turning on everything that we need to manage the environment going forward. And again, this may be new to some people. This may be very familiar to others. But again, the Azure environment is different, obviously, than your on-premise environment. There are different tools and reporting and analytics that are provided. But there's a lot there for you to leverage, most certainly, to help you get your job done. And then finally, preparing for Defender for Cloud. And so we can set policies to enable Defender for Cloud for our Azure subscriptions. Defender for Cloud, again, has a few different aspects within Microsoft Azure and M365. Ultimately, this is your security portal within your Microsoft tenant. Microsoft provides you with your security posture and a security score based on how everything is configured, both within M365 as well as Azure, making recommendations of where you can tighten security, where they've got recommendations that you should at least review certain areas or follow other best practices. Again, some of these things will be configuration based that are part of your subscription. Others may be additional subscription elements that you'll have to weigh the risk versus the cost. So what are your next steps? Again, as I mentioned, we have gone through things at a fairly high level. We've talked about, again, cost considerations and leveraging the Azure calculator. It will give you a good idea. Again, sometimes these cloud migrations are driven out of IT. Other times they're driven by senior management with a feeling that the organization should be more cloud-based. Again, there may or may not be appreciations for the cost. And, in doing a return on investment, again, it's not necessarily going to be a cost savings in moving to Azure in the cloud. What it is going to do is it's going to free up your resources that may have spent more time patching servers and doing administration tasks and doing a lot of activities related to the on-prem servers. Again, it may free them up for other more higher value activities in looking again at application modernization or different ways for us to leverage the data that we're capturing and things like that. And it's going to potentially move your expenditures from a capital expenditure to an operating expense, which some organizations will look at more favorably. But at the end of the year, it's unlikely that your spend strictly on technology is going to go down with your move to the cloud. So I think, you do need to have an appreciation for how what the expected costs are, how it's broken down, and then, as we mentioned, monitoring what the spend is for those different resources that you've turned on. Number two, put a plan together. So based on the calculator, based on, again, the steps that we had identified earlier of, discovering what you have. And again, that discovery may be quick and easy for some of you who have a very good understanding of what you've got today. Versus others that maybe have stepped into an environment that they are not as familiar with or have not been a part of setting up right from day one. So again, getting a good idea of what you've got and why you've got it, setting up your Azure landing zone, and hopefully we've given you, again, some high-level steps here and areas for consideration as you set that up. I had mentioned asking for assistance if required. What we probably should have included in that bullet as well is, doing the necessary research and reading with the resources that are available, and then really kicking off the process and stepping into it. So, again, a simple environment could potentially be moved over a weekend, whereas, a more complex environment, we'd want to phase that in and certainly have the necessity for a hybrid world for some period of time. As with any migration project, we'd always recommend that you limit that hybrid environment as much as possible. Again, not by moving, too quickly that it elevates the business risk of the project, but the less time that we live in that hybrid world, the less time we have to, monitor and manage those two environments. So we would recommend, minimizing that overlap as much as possible. So on that note, I would like to say thank you to everyone who attended today's session. We will be posting this up on our website and to our normal channels. And we do have, I think, a final slide. If you'd like to leave us a review, and that review can be on today's session, you could also include in that review other topics that you'd be interested in hearing from us on. As I did mention at the beginning, Point Alliance is a Microsoft-based consulting company focused on all things cloud. So we would be more than happy to do sessions on a variety of topics outside of the ones that we have already done over the last 12 months as we plan for 2024. So thank you, everyone, so much for attending. I'm checking the chat and questions and answers, and I do not see any that are popping up. So we will get an email out to you with a link to the presentation and the video. And otherwise, have a great day, and we'll hopefully talk to you all again very soon. Thank you so much.